Welcome to our next installment of our Dream Job webinar series. My name is Danny Rubin, and I'm the founder of Rubin. We provide resources around the country for employability skills, communication skills to CTE programs, in particular, helping students to communicate properly for opportunities that they want. And today, we are fortunate to have Spencer Jason with us to talk about working as an engineer. And we will dive into Jason's career and his new opportunity that he's about to start, which is exciting. We'll talk about all of that in just a moment. And before we do, as you know from us, we love to share resources. And we are getting back to our roots a little bit with this session. And I want to offer to the group the chance to have a collection of email templates. We love to teach students how to write emails, how to use the phone, how to speak and hold conversation. And we'll talk about how those skills play a role as an engineer in just a few minutes, being a good communicator as an engineer. But let me show you what you're looking at here is a collection of email templates that we have written that help students with tricky situations like applying for jobs, asking about internships, thanking someone after a job interview, asking for a letter of recommendation, following up after a job fair, asking someone to be a reference, all these hard email conversations. And how do we write them as best we can? And so we provide a Google Drive folder of email examples that you can share with students or use in class. And if you're interested in those templates, this is all you have to do. Whether you've been to our sessions before or you're new, just go to the chat right now and type the word interested and your email address. Interested and your email address. This is for the teachers who can then provide it to the students. This is an offer for the teachers. And if you are new to our community and have not received resources from us before, we will send you an invite on the calendar for Wednesday to chat for just a moment, make sure you know how to locate it and open it and use it, and send you on your way. So again, please type interested and your email address if you'd like these resources. And if you're new to our community, we will contact you with an invite on your calendar for Wednesday. If the time's not good, just reply back with a new time. It's a short conversation on the phone. And we look forward to talking to you. We had originally proposed this session as for mechanical or industrial engineers. Today, we're speaking actually with a manufacturing engineer. All the same, the students will receive a certificate for our session. Will come out over email on Wednesday. And one more news and note, we will keep our Dream Job webinars rolling along. In November, we'll be talking with a software developer who is an expert with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So if you're interested in helping students to learn about that world and what it's like to work in artificial intelligence, his name is Amit Shkolnik, and he is a brilliant man. And he's really good at explaining it in simple terms that even I can understand, because I don't understand this stuff very well. And so he will talk to us on November 8th. Teacher, show of hands, if you're interested, if your students are interested in learning about AI and how to work in AI, let me see some Zoom hands if that's something that's interesting to you, because I hope you'll join us in November when we talk to Amit. That'll be a really cool conversation, sort of adjacent to today, learning about science, technology, but in a different capacity. So those are the news and notes for our session. Now I will bring in Spencer. And actually, as I do, let me grab one more time. We have, while that everybody's here, in the chat, we provided a worksheet to guide today's conversation. So you're welcome to, we put that over email. You're welcome to grab it now, give it to students. So as we speak with Spencer, you can be capturing notes and students can be writing down the best things that they hear. So Spencer, thank you for taking time out of your day to speak to us. Let's start by giving everybody your brief career history, where you're from, where you went to school, some of the jobs you've held so far, and what you're about to do, and then we'll we'll get in there.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. I'm excited to speak with all you guys and share a bit of my journey and
Absolutely.
hopefully help you guys along. Um, I grew up in Connecticut. Did a couple of technical classes. I've always been kind of a technical person. Um, always taking stuff apart and sometimes being able to put it back together. Right, that's okay. Um, and I ended up going to school for engineering. Right, I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology out in Rochester, New York. Um, and A big thing about picking a school in which you want, it's okay to not know exactly what you want to do
Mm,
inside that school. And a lot of schools, especially engineering schools, have undecided engineering or engineering exploration programs for first years. And if you don't super know, and even if you do, I highly recommend going that route. Don't be afraid of that. There's no stigma there. Um, and so I actually started my education in pure mechanical engineering. That's what I was going to do. Um, and Pretty soon after I started, I realized that's not exactly what I want to do. And RIT had a technology program, which takes you a little further away from a lot of the pure hardcore math and science theory work that's a classical engineering route, and puts you into the application stuff, right? So instead of you know being put in a box and trying to figure out Newton's laws on your own and doing the math, let's say, hey, this is Newton's law. What can you go do with it, right?
yep.
And that's what I loved, right? Just get me building stuff, um, and did that route. Went to RIT. It was a co-op school. So before I graduated, I had at least 15 months of real world work experience as an engineer in a couple of
Okay.
different programs.
Yeah.
Um, which is great because it means that you can graduate without a job search, right? That was huge for me, right? So just a thing to keep in mind when you're looking at schools. Um, I ended up in the startup battery world. At the time, 2013, there was a big push for electrification, battery storage technologies, and so I got into that, and followed that startup from working in the laboratory to having a 500,000 square foot factory, shipping product around the world, and all the way to bankruptcy. Right,
Wow.
huge product art. Um, but I got to work with a ton of really bright people on the way, right? And that first job was huge for me in the rest of my career. Not a day goes by where I don't use some of the skills I learned in those first couple of years. Um, from there, I moved into the medical device industry. Started working on uh, products for in-home hemodialysis.
What's that
Direct flow
word? What was that dialysis word?
hemodialysis.
Hemodialysis. Okay.
Yeah.
Chemo, like
So
chemotherapy, like
no,
CH.
hemo, no C. Hemo is in blood.
Hemo. Hemo.
Yep. And so that's a process where you take somebody's blood out of their body and filter it directly and then put it
Wow.
back in them. So very high risk, difficult to do in a home environment. But we did that for a while. And then I moved into a laparoscope company. And now from there, I'm now leaving the medical device field to go into another high reliability field, which is burner controls. So
Yeah, you know what? I want to talk about that in job in just a second. I want to share my screen. Before we do, I want to encourage the teachers and students right now, go to the Q&A along the bottom of Zoom, start putting in your questions for Spencer, put your name and your school so we can give you credit for your question. So start putting your questions for Spencer. And as you do, yeah, as we get into Spencer's new job that he's about to start, let me pull up this. I got the right site, right?
you do.
Okay. So I was looking around. I always try to do my research ahead of time. This is an industry I know very little about. So I was trying to learn the about us and the products. Tell me again, let's tell the students, what does FireEye do broadly and what drew you to this job?
Yeah. There's a lot of things in this world that use fire combustion for power, right? It's incredibly dangerous. We take it for granted. But just a few years ago, local to me, right, Andover, Massachusetts, there was a natural gas explosion, and like five houses just disappeared.
I remember that.
completely gone. Boom, right? So these are incredibly important devices, not just for homes, hospitals, large buildings, power plants that power your homes. Um, they all run on fire. So these devices are able to see a flame and monitor the characteristics of it to make sure it's burning properly. There's not too much fuel, there's not too much air. And then if there is an issue, to intervene appropriately. Because like everything today, the systems are so much more complex than everybody really wants them to be. These safeguards need to continually advance as well. So it's a bunch of stuff. Optical electronics, all different fuel sources. There's a lot of deep technology going on here that, unfortunately, in this product's lifetime, maybe 6 or 7 people are going to see it, but thousands of people's lives are going to depend on it.
Right. It's very specialized, but the people who need it really need it. So what will your job be?
Yeah, so my job, so I'm a manufacturing engineer, right? So
And to explain
manu-
that difference between manufacturing engineer and like industrial or civil or mechanical, what is a manufacturing engineer?
yeah, so manufacturing engineers are really the people that are sitting between design and production, right? So somebody designs a laptop, right? Um, but then somebody has to build it, right? So understanding how I go from a drawing of a laptop to understanding all of the supply chain impacts. What are my manufacturing tools required? And then how do I do this? How do I make not just one laptop, but 500,000 laptops in a year, right? So what are the resources I need? The people, different tools, the planning station, testing of all these products, right? How do you get those to get into a consumer's hands, right? And so manufacturing sits at a pretty interesting crossroads. In the course of a week, I will deal with every single department in a company, right? Um, so
That
whether
is,
that's yeah, it's pretty unique. Now the core skill set, right, is typically uh, mechanical, right? Most manufacturing engineers started as mechanical, some electrical, depending on the industry. Um, that's your core skill set because you are still working with so much physical stuff. But then the actual where you apply those skills is a little bit different.
so it sounds to me, and this goes into a question in the Q&A, that you have to have equal parts sort of engineering and technical knowledge and the ability to translate that to the consumer and have conversations across the company or even out to perhaps even vendors or customers. You seem like you're kind of right in the middle there, having talking to a lot of different people and being able to maybe translate some of the technical to someone who may not understand. And I just want to ask this question on top of it so we can include the students. Richard Harris's students in North Carolina said, what are some of the employability or communication skills that are helpful to be good in this role? So how would you leverage your communication skills to kind of sit at that crossroads?
Yeah, so communication is a big part of my job and my role. Whether that's reading and interpreting a written document that's very technical, and then distilling that out to somebody who maybe works in purchasing, who
Right.
has no idea what any of the specifications mean, right? And really shouldn't have to, but needs to know or get some help and guidance of where to look, where to find it, how to have a technical conversation with a supplier, and when to have a technical conversation with a supplier. So being able to translate written documentation into a conversational piece to weed out little details that are necessary. And then also the inverse, distilling that down, right? So once I have a good understanding of the engineering going on with a product or a process, um, relaying that to an operator, right? Somebody whose job is really to push the button all day. There's certain details they need to know, or steps they need to do. So we also use a lot of reverse communication techniques, right? So sit down in a conference room, and taken a whole bunch of information, and then I'll go and I'll sit down with Microsoft PowerPoint and pictures and draw little arrows all over stuff to make work instructions so that anybody can walk in on day one, look at the instructions, and do the job to the level it needs to be done. So we use those communication skills both ways.
I want to drill down on that a little bit more because let's say you're talking to somebody in purchasing and they have a lot of complex language in front of them. Let's just like kind of block and tackle. Like, what are you actually doing to make sure they understand? Are you writing like an email or report that like goes into like really breaks it down? Are you picking up the phone and making sure they understand before you hang up? Like, what does it look like to make sure somebody understands?
Yes, is the answer. All those things. Um, and so a lot of times what I'll do is I will write out my email, right? Because sometimes we're, hundreds of miles apart, time
Right.
zones, even, right? I'll be working with China one day and, Colombia the next, depending on where everybody is. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll write out my email and then pick up the phone before I click send, right? So I like to write up the email because that helps me get my notes in order. So I know what my talking points are going to be. And then I'll pick up the phone and call them. Hopefully they pick up. Hopefully they pick up and then talk them through. So whether it's, my material specifications, the timelines I need, whatever the topic of discussion is, ask for understanding, right? Say, hey, what do you know about the situation so far? Because a lot of times when you go to communicate, they already know the answer, right? How many times you sit in class, right, and the teacher's telling you this stuff, but you already know, right? And then you check out. So that happens in the real world too. That's not going to go away, right? So I like to check for understanding. Do you already know what's going on, right? And then verify, right, or correct, so that we're not over communicating. I've sat down with that email 4 pages long and hacked it down to 3 sentences, right? Because that's all they needed to know,
Wow.
right? It happens. It happens. And vice versa, right? Sometimes you get a new person on a job and they have no clue, right? So when you've got what you thought was 3 little bullet points is now 3 pages because they need a lot of help, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I always like to do that in tandem. And then whether they understand it or not, send that email, right? Have that record.
Yep.
And that way you've got the notes.
I love that. I love that. And I want to drill down one step further. Okay. This is good stuff. And it's important for students to hear. Um, because I know students today, a lot of us would rather like text people. We'd rather not, because speaking on the phone can be like make us nervous, right? Because it's a real live conversation and we have to be kind of on. But tell me, did you, prior to working in these jobs, did you have a little apprehension about speaking on the phone? It's something you had to kind of work through to have the confidence to just call somebody you may not know and just start a conversation? What has it been like for you to gain confidence using the phone?
Yeah. So, like probably a lot of you guys out there, a lot of people in engineering, right? You're possibly introverted, right? And I tend to be introverted as well. That's one of the skills that I worked on in college, in class, outside of class, was how do I do some of these things that extroverts do naturally, right? How do I learn to be comfortable starting a conversation? How do I learn comfortable listening, right? Which is the not the same as being present, right? Very different. So how to actively listen and understand, right? So that's something that you have an opportunity to do at college, in the workplace, anywhere. Is to practice these social skills. And the key word is practice. You got to go and do it, or else you're not going to be ready for game time, right?
Do you
Uh,
do you think that to like grow in a company, like as an engineer, like if you wanted to work in management, do you think those types of skills are important?
Absolutely. And also, even if you don't want to work in management, right, you need to be able to communicate well. Very, very, very few engineers get to sit in a silo and just be smart. Um,
Ooh, good
it's
line.
it's the truth, right? If you can't interact with other people or you really struggle with it, you're probably not going to advance because the work's not going to come to you, right? So you have to be able to go and interact. That manager has to know that when he goes and talks with you, you understand the assignment and that you get the product done at the end of the day. That's what makes a great employee, right? A great individual contributor. Um, and in today's day and age, there's so much teamwork, whether you want it or not. So like the role I'm going into, they're using electrical engineering firms out of India because we're part of a giant corporation, right? So whether or not I want to work with outside team members, I have to. It's there, right? I'm going to be on the phone with India to work on some engineering issues. So uh, those skills are incredibly important to have a successful career.
That's great. Thank you for that, for those tips. I think it's really critical to get inside the work, help students understand what it really is. A question here from Brandon Mitchell, Barrow Arts and Sciences. Let's get into the job itself. Like, what will your hours be? What is it like to work for an engineering company or technical company? What is like, do you get vacation? What's it like? And did this job sort of line up with the things you were looking for?
Yeah, so that's all going to depend on your company, right? So I've been all over the place, right? Being in the startup world, startup companies, your hours are all the time. There's only so much cash to keep making paychecks to get the
Right.
next product out, right? So you are there. You're on site. You're on the phone. You're doing what it takes. It is a young man's game and an old man's game, or young woman, old woman, whatever.
Right.
It's tough to be in a startup at the mid career level. Um, Being on the manufacturing side of things, I end up being on call a lot, right? If I have a piece of equipment that goes down at some strange hour and maintenance can't fix it, or there is no maintenance coverage, right? I'm there, I'm going in. So that's just part of the nature of my role. If you're in a pure design role, right, you can expect to be a 9 to 5er, right? If you're more production support, right, your hours are typically going to be skewed a little earlier. Um, if you're working with a lot of people overseas, right, if you're working with China, you could be on night shift basically as an engineer in some large corporations. So it's all going to depend on the company, but on the average, you're talking about 8 hour days. Um,
Yeah.
Weekends usually off. It's pretty nice, right?
Standard,
Yeah.
stable.
Uh, Yep,
Well,
vacation packages, 401ks, places that have engineers are usually making money, so they can return those benefits to their employees.
and I think it's important for students to understand, like, and you've said this in a few different ways, that you go work for a company, you work in the environment that you fall into. Your company, FireEye, is owned by Carrier, right? Which is we all know Carrier, like the air conditioning company, right? So you're part of a conglomerate of sorts. And so you're in their world. They have vendors, customers, technicians around the world, right? So you can't dictate what exactly you're going to do every day, especially when you're new. You have to just jump in and they say, go do this, call them, do that. And you just say, all right. I mean, that's what I've signed up for. And you seem like you're sort of ready for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of doership involved. Uh, I think anywhere, if you're expecting to call the shots, you're probably not approaching the job the right way, right? Um, So it's kind of how I see it.
Yep.
And a
Yep.
lot of building trust with the people you work with. That goes a long way, and that goes in some of those extrovert skills, right? Is to
How
be
do
able to
you
build
build
trust.
trust?
I build trust by demonstration, right? So you see a need, right? You see somebody struggling, right? You go, you investigate, you find out what they need. If you can help, right, offer that help, and then make good on it, right? Nobody likes promises; they like solutions.
Yep.
So, and that's what it is for me with building trust, to show up and say, hey, I'm that reliable person. I'm going to be there. I'm going to do what it takes, and we're going to get these problems solved. Right? You do that once or twice, you become a go-to person. Right? You get to really be that continue that relationship with a foundation of trust.
For students, Well, here's a good question. Angela asked it in the chat, and I'll ask mine. How do you deal with language barriers? You're calling China, Colombia. How do you work through that?
That is a skill that I actually began to develop in college. I had a brilliant professor for plastics, Professor Kim, who was uh, born and raised, had his whole career in South Korea. Right, Professor Kim had an incredibly thick accent, and myself and most of the rest of the class really struggled with his lecturing um, because it was hard to understand him. We lived and died by his PowerPoints. Uh, but we found out during a an exercise that one of the returning students, so this guy, Sinad, he was Lithuanian, and he was probably in his late 40s, coming back to finish his degree. And he understood every single word that came out of Professor Kim's mouth. Well, no issues. And we were working with outside of class one day, and we're like, "What? How do you understand what he's saying?" And it turns out that Sanad took English classes with a whole bunch of South Koreans, and so he learned English with a South Korean accent. Um, and
Wow.
so yeah, it was crazy. And so what we learned to do was to find. He ended up translating for the rest of us, right? He was saying, Sanad, what did he just say? Um, and so that's one of the things you need to learn about listening is that while you're listening to somebody, you can also watch other people for their capability to understand,
Mm,
right?
mm.
So it's not necessarily about your ability to understand, but your ability to seek out the rest of the information. So with language barriers and whatnot, it's often a group effort. So if you're going to be on a call, on a discussion with a different language, don't go alone, right? Bring at least one other person to help because it's hard to listen, right? So that gives you somebody else to double check for understanding. Um, did they mean that phrase the way they said it? Right? Maybe not. We misuse phrases across languages all the time,
Yep.
um, and when
Yep.
you get into technical details, that can be pretty difficult too. So my number one tip and trick for working across the language barriers is the buddy system. Bring somebody else
I
to
think it's
check.
great, great advice. There's a question from Lori Epic in the Q&A about how going back to pushing yourself in college to be more of an extrovert, or I don't want to use that term necessarily, but just to be comfortable talking to people listening. How did you like go to student organizations and put yourself in rooms? How did you practice? How did you sort of force yourself to get better?
Yeah, so I took a pretty old traditional route. I ended up joining a fraternity, right?
Okay.
So
I'm familiar
um,
with that.
yeah, uh, joining fraternity, but you can join any sort of group, right? There's a ton of groups out there. Fraternities and sororities just tend to be a little pointedly social, right? So there you've
Yes.
got
Yes.
a group of like-minded people who are out there to uh, have a presence and make a difference across the campus. And so if you do struggle with extroverted skills, right, those social skills, Greek life could be a good route for you. And there's a ton of different flavors of Greek life out there. It's not just what you see on TV or the news, right? There's a whole range of social involvement in the Greek life. Um, but there's also a lot of opportunities out there. Say you all you want to do is turn wrenches at school, go join Formula SAE or Formula Baja, right? Join your
What are
electric
those? Wait,
vehicle
let me
club.
write those down. Formula SAE.
Yeah, so these are car teams. Colleges compete in
How do you
race
spell
cars.
Baja? Baja?
Yep.
Okay. I'm writing this in the
Yeah.
chat. All right. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So Formula Baja is an international competition. You build an off-road vehicle and you go race it. There's a bunch of different types of competitions for it, different tests for your vehicle. Um, that's exciting. I think just a couple of years ago, the championships were in Argentina.
Cool.
You can go all over the world, meet people from all across the world, do we're building a formula car, so you all get to play the same game and see how good you are against each other. So it's pretty exciting there. Formula SAE, you build basically a tiny F1 car, right, or an IndyCar style vehicle. There's a lot of things like that. And you can join a technical club. You can go do theater, right? Technical crew on theater. You're running lights, audio, wiring, all the stage building stuff. There's a whole lot of technical stuff going on there. So there's all sorts of opportunities at any institution you end up at to go practice those skills.
That's great. Great answer. Very practical. I really like how we're drilling down, as an engineer should, right, to the heart of the matter, and really helping students understand. Let me take a quick pause and remind people, if you came in a little late, that we are happy to share a Google Drive of email templates for some classic career scenarios like seeking internships, writing thank you notes, asking for recommendation letters, all kinds of things. And if you would like this list of email templates, just go to the chat right now, type the word interested and your email address. This is for the teachers here, and they'll share it down to the students. Interested in your email. And then if you're new to the Rubin community, we will send you an invite for a short conversation on Wednesday, just a quick calendar invite to explain how to access these resources and use them in the classroom. So look out for that invite. And if the time's not good, just reply back with a new time. It's no big deal. And also we have another webinar coming up in November. We're talking to an AI software developer, Amit Shkolnik, learning all about the world of working in AI and machine learning, deep learning, chat GPT, how all that works to the best of our knowledge to figure it out in 30 minutes. So join us in November. Spencer, as we wrap up, I want to ask you, if you were back in middle school, high school, what classes would you recommend students take? What could they be working on even before college? Because many students here are not in college yet. What would you recommend they be doing? Learning technical skills and also those professional skills.
Yeah, oof, that's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, there's the standards, right? In a technical field, you're gonna be using math and science, right? You just are. So a lot of what you can learn in those math and science skills is really the associated skills, right? So being able to run integration in your head is not super valuable, but being able to use the textbook to make sure you can get the right answer is.
Okay.
So it's those study skills that if you don't learn them now in middle school and high school, you're probably not going to have the time to learn them in college. So even if the subject matter you're working on isn't hard, make sure you practice your study skills. They're incredibly valuable.
What's an example of a good study skill in your mind?
Highlighting, right? For me, right? Read all the words, don't just skim, right? And then highlight your own books. Scribble in the pages, right? Why things make sense or don't make sense. So just being able to build that reference material for whatever it may be. Because today it's math, right? But for me next week, it's probably going to be a technical manual on optoelectronics, right? So I need to be able to go and read through that material and pick out what's important and where I need to, what I understand, what I don't understand, so I can go through those areas. This is probably number one. Don't skimp on your English courses, right? Learning vocabulary is a big thing, right? I would say probably 30% of engineering is actually vocab, right? Knowing what the words are and what they mean, so you can have an effective meeting to go on and do the work. And the ability to pick up those strange words as they show up in conversation, right, is very important, because you're going to be in a conference call with experts that are not there to teach you, but you're there to learn. or to understand what's going on. So being able to pick up on context clues and whatnot is a very valuable skill as an engineer.
Excellent. Excellent. Can we have some Zoom hands up as a thank you to Spencer for his time today? I thought he was excellent. Advice is so solid, so practical, and that's what it's all about in our Dream Job webinar. So Spencer, thank you for your time. We wish you the best of luck in your new role. And thank you to Jenny for her sign language services. Thank you all for being here. And hopefully we'll see you in November for our AI discussion, which will be really cool. And I hope you all have a great week and a great rest of the month and a happy Halloween. We'll see you soon. Spencer, thank you again.